Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just went viral, sharing that she's freezing her eggs to feel more in control of her life.
Maybe in life, you can't have everything, but here's the secret. You can have a hell of a lot.
Freeze your eggs now and buy yourself time later. That's the fertility industry's exact pitch. For Christian women who may be concerned about when they'll get married or have kids, egg freezing may seem like a safety net, but is it really? I'm Emma Waters, and it's time to start rethinking fertility. So on today's episode, we're going to dive into two areas. The first is the reality of egg freezing, the science behind it, the cost, the risk, and why the industry's promises don't always hold up. Second, we're going to look at a Christian framework for thinking through egg freezing and all of the other ethical questions that come with it. Before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel, hit like, and leave us a review. It really does go a long way in helping other people get this information, and we would really appreciate it. All right, so let's start with the basics. The success rates for egg freezing are inconsistent at best. In fact, the odds that any single frozen egg will eventually result in a live birth are somewhere between 2 and 4%. These are incredibly low numbers, meaning that at a minimum, when a woman is freezing her eggs to try to preserve her future fertility, she'll need at least 20 eggs to give herself the chance at having a child at all. That means it usually takes a minimum of 2 to 3 cycles to retrieve enough eggs to be a reliable path to parenthood. And there's one study in particular that looked at 15,000 women who froze their eggs and found that fewer than 300 children had been born. That's crazy because it means that their egg freezing outcomes had a 1.6% success rate. Now, of course, this could mean that some women froze their eggs and then simply never went back to use them because they ended up having kids on their own or weren't interested in having kids at all. So it's not necessarily claiming that every single egg was an attempt to create a human embryo and have a baby. And yet, the fact that out of 15,000 women, fewer than 300 children were born should be a massive neon sign that this is far from a fail-safe way to preserve your fertility and have kids later on. And if you're banking your future fertility on egg freezing, you may need to rethink your plan altogether. The process of freezing your eggs is not without risk either. So to freeze your eggs, you spend roughly 2 weeks injecting yourself with synthetic hormones to stimulate your ovaries to create as many eggs as possible. Now, keep in mind that a woman typically will create only 1 egg per month naturally in her cycle. And yet to make the process of egg retrieval and egg freezing worth it, doctors stimulate her body to create as many as 35 or 40 eggs at a single time to increase her odds of success. Now, most women are not creating that many because that's actually incredibly difficult for your body to do, but it is possible. And depending on how many you create at one time, that will determine how many cycles of egg retrieval you have to go through for it to be a reliable fail-safe for you. And keep in mind on top of that, that women are born with the total number of eggs that they will ever have. The body loses thousands of eggs each month through natural cell death, even before a girl starts her periods. By menopause, some women have less than 1,000 left, and any complications from egg retrieval could risk her fertility altogether. In some cases, women can have pretty harsh side effects to the hormones and to the process of extracting those eggs. One of the most serious risks is something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. This is where your ovaries overreact to the hormones and can swell dangerously big. It retains fluid in your stomach. It can result in blood clots, severe pain, and in some cases, sepsis or even death if your body doesn't either recover or isn't treated accordingly. Egg retrieval can also correlate with a higher risk of cancer, particularly ovarian or breast cancer. So some women who are freezing their eggs and have really bad side effects can actually threaten their future fertility if things go wrong. And these are some of the risks that I don't think women have in mind when they're going through it. So, once all of these eggs are created and they're sitting in your stomach, it's kind of bizarre. If you've ever seen pictures of a woman who's awaiting her egg retrieval, she kind of looks pregnant because her stomach is so big, holding all of the many eggs that she's actually created at one time. And I had one friend of mine who actually went through this process to freeze her eggs, who said it was the most bizarre experience because she could actually feel all the individual eggs in her stomach and like tell where they were. And she was like, it was the most like unnatural thing that I've ever experienced. So then what doctors do is they take this long needle, give the woman a lot of drugs to dull the pain, insert it through her vaginal wall, and then extract each egg one at a time. It's a rather gruesome process to imagine, which is why a lot of women prefer not to feel the pain and in some cases actually become sedated so that they can just block it all out. And the cost is not trivial. You're typically looking at somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 to pay someone to stimulate and retrieve your eggs, not including annual storage fees holding onto those eggs year after year until you decide you're ready to use them. And if you ever want to use those eggs, and I think this is one of the most crucial parts of the discussion, especially for Christians, is that you have to rely on IVF or in vitro fertilization to have a baby. You can't harvest your eggs and then simply put them back in your body when you're ready to conceive a child with your husband. But you are necessarily committing not only to freezing your eggs, which costs a lot of money, both at the time and year after year, but then you're also committing to this incredibly expensive procedure of in vitro fertilization that can cost an additional $12,000 to $30,000. And it's for this reason that you'll see some egg freezing companies, such as Cofertility, actually try to get women in the door by telling them that if you will sell us half of your eggs, we'll pay the price of retrieving the other half of your eggs for you to use. So think about this. They're literally saying, women, you want to preserve your fertility, you want to extract your eggs, but you don't have the money? Well, here's what you can do. Give us half of your eggs, half your DNA, your future children, and we'll let you keep the other half and we'll cover the bill for you. And secondly, you see this a lot in corporate America, but in many larger companies, egg freezing is actually one of the hot commodities they're offering women as an incentive to come work for them. So they'll say, well, guess what? You can actually focus on your career. Don't worry about having children right now. And this is a benefit, quote unquote, that your health insurance can potentially cover. Now, one of the perverse and unintended consequences of this is that it lulls women into this false sense of security that they can just delay getting married or delay having children. So while the benefit to the woman is not guaranteed, the benefit to the company is, because they're getting a productive worker bee for as many years as possible before she takes time to have children. Now, there's one exception to my clear skepticism about the egg freezing industry, and it's this: women who are undergoing chemotherapy treatments that either will or could threaten the integrity of her eggs. And I think that, while a little more rare than some of the cases we're talking about, is one of those clear exceptions where the benefits of either never being able to have biological children or freezing your eggs in hope that it works are clearly in favor of freezing your eggs. Of course, this will still mean you have to use IVF, which is a whole other discussion about the moral and ethical harms and risks associated with it, but it's a very different conversation than simply being a healthy 28-year-old woman freezing her eggs just to delay her fertility. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at the cost, the risk, and the industry behind egg freezing. And now it's time to get to the actual question, which is, should Christian women freeze their eggs? So first off, eggs are in a distinct moral category from human embryos. Human embryos are genetically complete and distinct human persons at the earliest stage of development, but the eggs are just the gametes, the building blocks of human life, if you will. And I know this can get confusing language-wise because sometimes we refer to human embryos simply as fertilized eggs, which implies that eggs themselves are somehow in the same moral category, but the truth is that they're not. not. So there is no moral prohibition, for example, for the Christian to destroy their eggs because it's not a human person. It's important to keep that distinction clear. However, the crucial question of when we're asking if a Christian woman should freeze their eggs is that what we're ultimately asking is, should a Christian woman rely on IVF to have babies? Because to freeze your eggs is with the assumption that you will have to use IVF in the future if you want to use them. Now, we have whole episodes diving into IVF, especially with all of the moral and ethical risks that come with that. But there's one particular variation of IVF that some Christians have opted for, and it's called gamete intrafallopian transfer, or GIFT. And so GIFT is very distinct from typical IVF because you're not actually creating any human embryos outside of the body. In GIFT, you will still extract your egg and your sperm from the man and woman, whether they're frozen or extracted fresh. But then instead of creating human embryos outside of the womb, doctors will actually take a catheter, insert the egg, an air bubble to separate it, and then a sperm, and insert it into the woman's fallopian tube. This means both the egg and the sperm end up in the woman's uterus, where natural single embryo conception can occur. And while it is a form of IVF because you are extracting the egg and sperm, you're not dealing with many of the moral and ethical risks that come with creating life outside the woman, because ultimately, if conception is going to happen, it happens inside her body. So for example, if you're a woman who has frozen your eggs and is wondering what to do with them and is really concerned and doesn't want to use IVF, then GIFT may be an option that actually allows you to preserve the integrity of your body and protect human life as much as possible. And I just want to say, I understand the anxiety that is surrounding this topic. And if you're a Christian woman who's in that painful season of not yet having met her husband and starting to really worry about if she'll ever have children, I just want to make space and think about this with you. Do we believe that God's sovereignty ultimately extends over our fertility? And in particular, do we believe that the timing of our lives, even the timing in these most intimate and desired places of having a future family, is under God's sovereign and good hand? Because ultimately, we're not trusting in our biological clock and we're not trusting in the medical industry, but we're placing our trust in the sovereign God who knows us and loves us fully. And this, like everything else, is certainly within his hands. Now, for any Christian women who are listening to me who are married and are considering egg freezing, that's a completely different conversation. And I just want to pause and really press you to consider, why aren't you desiring to have children or making space to have children now? If you're going through cancer treatments or there's some severe medical emergency, that's one thing that we talk about. But if you're a married woman who simply wants to delay your fertility, I think that's where we have to come to terms with what the Bible actually says about children. That children are a blessing from the Lord and they're the natural fruit of marriage. And if you're artificially delaying this within marriage and choosing to freeze your eggs instead, I think that's where we're getting into an area where we're actually misordering the goods the Lord has given us. And instead of being faithful to this gift of marriage and being open to life, we're choosing to delay fertility artificially. And if that's you, I would really, really, really encourage you to rethink the way that you're thinking about children, because in many cases, you could be missing the goodness that the Lord has for you right now. Thanks for thinking through these important but difficult topics with me. I'm Emma Waters. Join me next time as we continue rethinking fertility.
All sources are cited in the show notes found in the description of this episode.